Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Never was his Brexit manifesto more succinctly put than in Boris Johnson's memorable expletive, explaining what he'd do to business. That conveniently placed imperative left no one in any doubt of his feelings. But that was long, long ago. Well, last year anyway. And now it's all changed. This year's Boris Johnson has told us everything hinges on a trade deal with America, and that resettling relations with President Trump will be one of his first acts in Downing Street. Today, Donald Trump found himself on the receiving end of a scathing attack from Theresa May. Another first, perhaps. His tweet calling for some American-born congresswomen to go back to the broken and crime-infested places from which they came was, she said, completely unacceptable. This evening, both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt agreed with her words. Both declined to call it racist. So can you call out a famously thin-skinned man and still expect a juicy US trade deal? Here's Nick Watt.
A friend who bullies us is no longer a friend. And since bullies only respond to strength, from now onward, I will be prepared to be much stronger. And the President should be prepared for that.
Not quite a Love Actually moment, but clear rebukes after an incendiary suggestion by Donald Trump that 4 Democratic congresswomen from minority backgrounds should go home.
I have 3 half-Chinese children, and if anyone, and they're British citizens, born on the NHS, and if anyone ever said to them, go back to China, I would be utterly appalled. And I would say something else. It is totally un-British to do that.
If you're the leader of a great multiracial, multicultural society, you simply cannot use that kind of language about sending people back to where they came from. I mean, that went out decades and decades ago, and thank heavens for that.
All that after the President doubled down today on his tweets calling on the congresswomen to go back and fix what he called their totally broken countries. 3 were born in the US.
These are people that, in my opinion, hate our country. Now, you can say what you want, but get a list of all of the statements they've made. And all I'm saying that if they're not happy here, they can leave.
Most Tories had expected Boris Johnson to pull his punches tonight, but both leadership contenders were not finished, as they made clear they would decline to join the US president in military action against Iran.
I'm going to be very candid with you all tonight. If you say that going to war with Iran now represents a sensible option for us in the West, I just don't believe it is.
The risk we have is something different, which is an accidental war, because something happens in a very tense and volatile situation. People misunderstand the other one's motives, and so what we are working to do at the moment is to try and de-escalate as many of the tensions as we possibly can.
Donald Trump is hovering over this Tory leadership contest because relations with him lie at the heart of a new approach on Brexit promised by both candidates. Boris Johnson is telling allies that if he can prove to the EU that a landmark trade deal with the US is at least in sight, that would be a game changer and end what he regards as the EU's rather patronising approach to the UK. Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt know the US will drive a hard bargain, and they too have their own red lines.
I don't think it's something that we will be able to do incredibly quickly. Trump is a very shrewd and tough negotiator. We are not going to put the NHS up for sale in any trade deal.
I'm not in favour of doing anything, of importing anything from the United States that involves lower animal welfare standards or lower hygiene.
A guaranteed challenge on trade negotiations for whoever takes over in number 10. And a reminder today that they will face a rival unafraid of causing offence.
That was Nick Watt. In the last few minutes, President Trump has tweeted again along those lines. Here it is. We will never be a socialist or communist country. If you are not happy here, you can leave! Exclamation mark. It is your choice alone. This is about love for America. certain people hate our country, and it goes on at some length. Joining us now, Kirsty Blackman, the SNP's Deputy Westminster Leader who speaks on the economy, and from New Orleans, Shanker Singham, Director of the free market think tank, the IEA, and CEO of international trade consultancy, Competere, and he's advised Liam Fox on post-Brexit trade deals. Shanker, if I can start with you, do you think it was wrong of the two men, our next PM, to jump into this and condemn Donald Trump quite so clearly?
Well, I think the comments that the president made were obviously not appropriate, and I think they were dealt with properly and appropriately by the two candidates. But I think we have to separate out Trump the man and Trump the person from the actual trade agreement that we have with the United States of America, which is a country, and it's a country of many interests. We in the UK are also a country of many interests, and there are great synergies between the two, and there are great opportunities for the two in the trade deal that I think both the candidates would like to negotiate with the US.
So let me just come back on that one then. Boris Johnson, talking very much about the trade deal, made clear tonight there would be no lessening of food standards, hygiene standards or animal welfare in a deal with the US. Now, you know what it's like to deal with the US. Will the US accept that? Will they say, fine, we'll change our standards to fit in with what Britain wants?
Well, so it's not really a question of one side or the other changing their standards. It's a question, as the US basically said in their negotiating objectives. Basically, what they said in their negotiating objectives is that they want the UK or any trading partner, because these applied also to the EU and to Japan, not to use these regulations on animal and food safety to be a disguised method of protectionism, to protect, your domestic industry. So they would like them to be WTO compatible. They would like them not to be trade barriers, and
but that is a lower standard,
the UK
as you know.
Will not lower its standards.
That is a lower standard we have at the moment.
It's not a lower standard. The EU is in present violation of the WTO rules on SPS, the so-called sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and all the Americans want to do is for the UK or any other trading partner to comply with WTO rules, which is what all the WTO members want to do.
Okay.
The way you deal with this issue is not.
Sorry, just let me bring Kirsty Blackman. Is that what you heard tonight then? So Boris Johnson saying he can keep our standards high, we don't have to accept chlorinated chicken, we don't have to come to the level of the US because, as Shanker's explaining it, actually they're already higher.
Our standards are very high here. If you think about what the general public would think of this, the general public would be very clear that they don't want hormone-injected beef, they don't want chlorinated chicken, they don't want the standards for eggs, for example, that there are in the US. They don't want any of those things. And actually, we're a world-leading country with absolutely amazing agricultural produce. And I don't think that we should have to compromise on standards. And I don't think it's using it as a trade barrier to say that we want to keep those high standards. Our farmers work incredibly hard to keep those high standards and to ensure that our food is safe. And that's why we stick to those rules that there are in place. It's not about a trade barrier.
Shanker, are you advising Boris Johnson or the government at the moment? What is your role exactly?
No, I, as I've always done, I've made my trade policy knowledge and expertise available to anyone who wants to take advantage of it, and that's what I'm doing with actually both candidates and with members of the government as well. But I would come up with one point that was mentioned before, which is I think we have to be very clear of the difference between food safety and the difference between animal welfare. On food safety, you have to look at outcomes, and in terms of outcomes, actually, American produce is in fact, in many ways, safer than European produce. The rates of Campylobacter, for example, for chicken, are 5 times as high in Europe as they are in the US. And that's not to go into issues like listeria in French cheese and so forth.
But just the points Kirsty was making was hormone-injected beef and chlorinated chicken are things that we would have to accept if we went into a trade deal with the US.
Well, No,
Yes.
no, first of all, it is a negotiation. So you start the negotiation. We have a lot of offensive interest, and it's perfectly legitimate for the UK to say, if we're not getting what we want on things like financial services and other things, it's perfectly legitimate for us to say, no, we don't want to have a deal with you on that basis. We will have to negotiate very aggressively, and Boris Johnson or Jeremy Hunt or whoever
Doesn't sound like he's talking about aggressive deals,
very
does
aggressively.
it? Doesn't sound like that, does it? When he says, it's our first priority, we've got to get this right, all other trade deals are unlocked by getting the US trade deal right, it sounds like he has to be fairly supine when it comes to whatever the US asks.
Well, not at all, not at all. I think the issue with the US is that the US needs to have a positive trade agenda. They've pulled the US out of a lot of trade agreements. They pulled the US out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Obviously, we've got the China-US trade war going on. It's very important for the US to have a positive trade agenda.
Kirsty.
And they will want a country like the UK with whom they don't have a trade deficit. With whom they're able to no offshoring of US jobs.
Shanker, it's very important for Boris Johnson and for Jeremy Hunt to be able to say that they want a trade deal with America. And despite the fact that Donald Trump is coming out and making these racist comments today, they are still keen to toady up to the US and to try and convince them to have a trade deal. Now, the reality is that pulling out of the EU means that our relative strength in terms of negotiating is greatly reduced.
But you're not saying we should not be dealing with America, we should not be trading with America, are you?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we've got a very long history of a great relationship with America. The problem is that I think that we should all be calling out these racist tweets for what they are, the fact that they are racist tweets, the fact that he's making racist pronouncements. It's the important role of a critical friend. You can do that as kind of as part of a diplomatic process. You can say this is absolutely not right. It's not right to keep migrant children in cages, for example. You can call all of those things out. I think there's a real conflict of interest here between the two candidates for Prime Minister whose number one aim, it seems to be, is to get a trade deal with the US and to be calling out all of the backward steps that Donald Trump is taking. And don't forget, this is a president who's threatened to put massive tariffs on Scotch whisky.
Shanker, just talking of conflict of interest, I just want to ask you something, because you've said you're advising both candidates. You also have a firm, Competeri, that's advertised as offering clients advice on the opportunities arising from Brexit. So you are advising the men who will be our next Prime Minister and also advising the clients how best to take advantage of those trade deals?
No. So I'm not officially advising. I'm not on the campaign of either candidate.
But you've just said both candidates take your advice. Both candidates take your advice.
Well, both candidates talk to lots of people, okay? There is no official campaign that I'm on. Both candidates, every politician listens to people who know what they're talking about and know what they're talking about on international trade, if that's the subject they want to hear about. And that's the subject that I have. There are many people involved. There are many people, Kirsty, who are involved in this, there are in law firms, there are... Actually, I have 25 years of trade policy expertise, and I've advised, actually, I was a cleared advisor to the US government on trade policy.
Well, who are your firms then?
In this area.
Who are the firms that you're advising? Because if you're advising people on how to take advantage of Brexit, what's to stop you from representing an American poultry farm, for example?
There are many people, Kirsty. This is how it works. There are many people who are in law firms, who have clients, who are in consultancies, who you can look at the list of people involved. There are thousands of people who have all the areas of expertise. I am no different from any of them in that regard.
But you could be advising somebody how to take advantage of a new Brexit position and at the same time be recommending a new Brexit position to the very men who could be implementing that next. That's how it works.
No, the advice that I give, which is why I joined a think tank, which is why I write books, which is why I write articles about this, the advice that I give is what I think is in the best interest of the United Kingdom.
Kirsty, isn't the truth that actually we don't know the rules anymore? We know that Donald Trump is a maverick. We know that if he clicks his fingers, something could happen. Johnson has talked a lot about positive energy going into this, and that could be the way of unlocking whatever happens to Britain next.
But not to the detriment of food standards, of animal welfare
Which he's
standards,
promised won't happen.
or of our NHS. But the thing is that, you know, I'm not particularly sure that I trust Boris Johnson's word on anything that he says, given that he changes his mind on a regular basis, much like Donald Trump. So no, I don't have a huge amount of faith that the government team will not go in there negotiating with Boris Johnson or Jeremy Hunt at their head.
Do you think food standard agencies will drop in this country?
I think that if the #1 aim is to have a trade deal with the US at the expense of anything else, then I think, yes, I think it seems like this Conservative government will put that on the table.
OK, thank you both very much. Thank you.